One day I decided I was going to watch every single Disney feature-length animated movie in a row, in sequence, and write about it, review it, talk about how movies really are as opposed to how Disney talks about them or how Disney frames them as whether or not they're successes or failures. Spoiler alert, Disney never thinks it has a failure. It has failures that it turns into successes after telling audiences over and over and over again that was novel or creative or sometimes just even successful. Like Sleeping Beauty, for example. Disney talks about Sleeping Beauty like it was this great big successful thing and basis for princess movies or whatever, instead of this thing that had good art design but essentially lost money at theaters. Disney designed one of the castles, specifically the castle at Disneyland in California, to resemble the castle in that movie because Walt Disney knew that controlling your brand and your history was an active choice and not a random occurrence of how people interpret your work. So years and years and years later, we think of Sleeping Beauty as being a quintessential Disney movie and not kind of a failure. So in doing that, I was looking at the changing history of Disney from Pinocchio on, or sorry, not from Pinocchio, from Snow White onward. I've gotten from Snow White to The Princess and the Frog, and written about them on my blog and all that sort of thing, which has gotten me into thinking a lot about Disney movies and its future going forward. So Strange World just came out, and it's currently bombing. This is recorded uh, November 27th. So we've had one weekend of Strange World at the box office, and it's doing terrible. And there's going to be a lot of things that people say about this movie and why it is done poorly. I haven't seen it myself, but um, through the long view of Disney movies, this is a sci-fi adventure movie, and Disney has not done does not have a particularly great track record of that. Disney has all kinds of properties in science fiction and fantasy, whatever you consider superhero movies and Star Wars movies and all that sort of thing. But they have also a record of animated movies in sci-fi fantasy failing, whether that's um, Treasure Planet or Atlantis: The Lost Empire and its animated features, or Black Cauldron, or and its more live-action features, things like John Carter of Mars. For whatever reason, Disney audiences don't tend to show up for this. But that's not the only reason. People will say, like, oh, it's because there was a gay character in the movie and you couldn't show it in certain places because they don't accept gay characters. And, well, some people in the United States don't want that in their kids' movie. And look, obviously they're not going to get money from places that won't screen the film. Places like the Middle East, China, Russia, France aren't showing this movie, all for different reasons. Russia's more a political reason. China's got political reasons. The Middle East has uh, straight up don't like depictions of gay people in, or even the idea of gay people in their movies. And France has this thing where they don't. Let's just say they're not a big fan of showing a movie in theaters and then almost immediately showing it on a streaming network. So that's why France doesn't like that. But that's not the reason why this movie is bombing. The reason is longer than one movie and longer than 1 year. And frankly, I think it's because of business practices of the larger Walt Disney Company that this movie is bombing. So let's think about this in the short term and then think about this in the long term. Strange World came out 3 weeks after Wakanda Forever, Disney's probably biggest superhero movie of the year and sequel to a very popular Marvel superhero movie, Black Panther. Black Panther Wakanda Forever was always going to make a bunch of money, and it has. In fact, it was the number one movie at the box office the week that Strange World came out. It was supposed to make something like $60 million, and Strange World made like, I don't know, less than 20-ish, something like that. Um, this is a $180 million movie, Strange World. It costs way more to advertise and all that stuff. So he spent $180 million just on the movie, and probably a whole bunch more on distribution and advertising and everything else. And you put it right on the heels of one of your biggest movies of the year. Furthermore, 3 weeks from now, or when that movie, or when Strange World came out, possibly the biggest movie of the year, and maybe potentially biggest disappointment of the year, we'll see. Avatar 2, something like a $350 to $400 million expenditure before we even get to the distribution and advertising and all that stuff, is coming out. All three of these movies are made by the same company. So it wasn't probably going to go well that you stuck something that you spent over $200 more million on in between its own biggest competition. And you might be saying, like, well, this is an animated family movie, right? Like, why would it have competition with a superhero movie? Who do you think is seeing the superhero movie? Like, families are going out there and seeing that. And frankly, some families probably can't afford to see Wakanda Forever and Avatar 2 and Strange World. And they probably have Disney Plus at home. And if Strange World is going to be on Disney Plus in 45 days, then why bother going to the theater? This idea that something is on Disney Plus 45 days after the fact, I think has really, really hit their animated business. So let's talk about some of their animated movies. The last big animated movie that Disney did was Frozen 2. It made all the money in the world, sequel to a very, very popular and very, very successful animated movie, Frozen. It came out November 22nd, 2019. Like I said, made a butt ton of money. The next movie that they came out with was actually two movies. They decided to, for some reason, put two different Disney movies in March of 2020, which you might remember as being the month the world stopped, basically. So Raya and the Last Dragon came out March 5th. I find that hard to believe that they released a Pixar movie the day afterwards. Cost 100 plus million, made 130 million. Basically a big old failure when it comes to just box office receipts. Was it delayed? It was originally scheduled to come out November 25th, 2020. It was delayed to March. Why was it November 25th? Wasn't that when... Sorry, Frozen 2 came out 2019. So 2020 would have been the release date for Raya and the Last Dragon. So it gets delayed, which I guess means that Onward would have come out right when the pandemic... Onward's supposed to come out then, so I guess Raya encroached on Onward's release date, Onward being a Pixar movie. Essentially, Onward and Raya came out and just got utterly destroyed by the pandemic, lost a whole bunch of money, and throughout the rest of the pandemic, Disney would release these animated movies onto Disney Plus because at a certain point they just had to get rid of the movies they were making. They couldn't keep delaying them forever. So they sacrificed a whole bunch of movies to Disney Plus. Raya and the Last Dragon is a great example. Encanto is another good example. Encanto made something like $256 million, which again is not great for one of these movies, and probably got cannibalized by the streaming platform. I know I didn't see it, but I saw it on streaming, and I know it started to become popular at a certain point with his music, even though it came into theaters and nobody really gave a crap. On Pixar's end, a lot of Pixar movies came out during this time and didn't do great. Soul, for example, 121 million on a budget of 150 million. Luca, no budget, box office less than 50. Can I imagine they took a big old wash on that one. So we get to the pandemic starting to lessen and movies starting to come out into actual theaters. Encanto tried and didn't really do it. You get to Turning Red in March 11th of 2022 with Pixar, and they were going to have it in theaters, and then they pulled it. There was some resurgence of COVID. They didn't feel comfortable putting it into theaters. So its official box office, its budget was 175 million. Its official box office is 20 million. I don't know how they determine whether or not something was profitable through release on their streaming service when it was released for free, but I watched it and I thought it was really good, and it would have been interesting to see it come out into theaters. So cut to the next Pixar movie, because you can't delay Turning Red coming out for later because you've got so many other movies and so many other slots. For example, you have Lightyear. It comes out in June 17th, 2022. It's summer. We all agreed the pandemic is over and movies are coming out into theaters. Jurassic World is coming out into theaters and doing well. Top Gun is coming out into theaters and doing well. So Lightyear, a fifth sequel to the Toy Story franchise, starring only one of the Toy Story characters, but not the Toy Story character, in something that's marketed confusingly and makes it seem like it's the thing that inspired the toy, but it's also reality, and it's very confusing marketing. And it comes out, and nobody gives a crap. It cost $200 million to make, made $226 million, which is industry terms for basically losing a bunch of money. It doesn't cost just the budget. They cost money to advertise and distribute and all that stuff. So that loses a bunch of money. So over a 2 or 3 year period, essentially the last successful Disney animated feature you had was a sequel to the most successful thing they've ever done, Frozen 2, in 2019. And we are 3 years later, about to drop Strange World, and we've essentially chewed up and spit out Onward, Soul, Luca, Turning Red, Lightyear, 5 Pixar movies, Raya, The Last Dragon, and Encanto. Encanto got a little bit of buzz towards the end, but it certainly didn't make its money in theaters. So you've flushed 7 different animated features right down the toilet into streaming. And you conditioned your audience to show up and watch these animated movies in streaming. In fact, there's probably an entire generation of children watching movies at this point by Disney that have not actually seen a movie in theaters at all. And so under those circumstances, they're like, what's our best idea? Putting out Strange World in between 2 of the most probably profitable movies we will release this year. And so of course it bombs. Like, you've conditioned your audience to not even bother to show up to the movies. You conditioned your audience to watch them on streaming and pay nothing, or the $10 a month, or their parents $10 a month or whatever, and essentially just not give you money for the movie you spent $500 million to make. Like, Disney in general right now is undergoing kind of a strange process where they've pivoted so hard to the streaming service and bought so many things that they have what used to be major motion picture studios essentially just making stuff for the streaming service, like 20th Century Fox and everything it bought from there. If you look at their slate of movies, like, it's Avatar that they're going to release in theaters, and then just a whole bunch of stuff for streaming. They essentially turned Star Wars into something to make programs for their streaming service. And it looks like they're turning all of their animation studios into that as well. If they don't figure out how to get their audience to show up to the movie theater, or they don't figure out that they own too many properties and can't possibly get an audience to show up to each of them in a way that's profitable, and it doesn't really matter how much money Wakanda Forever makes if you're going to take a bath on everything else you release in theaters or everything else you make. So it's been interesting to chart the progress of Disney from, in the very beginning where they're making Snow White, and that's a groundbreaking thing, to the next few movies just losing so much money, to going into World War II where of course they're not making any money, to going back to people showing up for their movie theaters to see things like Cinderella or anything in the 50s, to Walt Disney passing away and undergoing another fallow period, into the Renaissance and coming up there and then going back down and reaching the part again where they bought Pixar and people are watching their movies again and just making so much money over the past decade before the pandemic, to now where it's like Disney is starting to become its own adversary. They're too big. They've conditioned their audience to not pay them money for things. And I'm kind of worried that somebody important is going to look at all of their assets and go, I mean, yeah, we're the animation studio, we're the animation company, but how many animation studios do we really need? Do we need any? Do we need one? Do we need two? We bought a third one and then got rid of that with Blue Sky Studios. That made the not Madagascar. That made the Ice Age movies and flushed that down the toilet. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. The next Disney movie that comes out is supposed to be called Wish. And I don't believe it has a release date of next November. I don't know what other release dates are in November that time. Are they going to surround it by other movies that are going to destroy Wish at the theaters? Pixar's next one is coming out in June. It's called Elemental. So we'll see what happens there. We got 6 months to see what Disney's going to do when it comes to Elemental, and considering the fact that the CEO just changed and looks like they're going to make some changes, it'll be interesting to see what happens with those release dates at all.